We wake up each morning with the belief that we can somehow guide the currents of life. We feel a primal urge to arrange the world, to tame the unpredictable forces that surround us, the whims of fortune, the emotions of others, even the slow turning of seasons. It is an exhausting aspiration, this desire to maintain perfect control. We strive for an illusion, believing that if we just push harder, or plan better, or speak more convincingly, the outcomes will finally align with our deepest wishes. But life rarely yields to such meticulous planning. In fact, much of what occupies our waking thought, the ceaseless worry about tomorrow or yesterday's regret, is simply energy spent on things beyond our grasp. We are constantly battling an invisible front against randomness itself. Consider the sheer effort involved in trying to manage every variable. We fret over a colleague's mood and dread its potential impact on our career. We analyze traffic patterns for hours before leaving the house, convinced that one misplaced thought could derail the entire day. We second-guess friendships based on missed texts or delayed calls, building intricate internal dramas around inconsequential silences. This relentless attempt to predict, to control, to manipulate, drains us until we feel hollowed out, exhausted by the sheer weight of what is unmanageable. The more tightly we grasp at outcomes, at approval, at wealth, at predictable happiness, the harder reality pushes back. We find ourselves trapped in a cycle of tension, perpetually anticipating failure or undesirable behavior from others. This struggle for comprehensive control is not merely stressful, it is philosophically counterproductive. It teaches us nothing about strength, only the futility of resistance. The ancient philosophers observed this pattern and offered a radical, yet profoundly simple, shift in focus. They did not advocate giving up on ambition or effort. Rather, they suggested we redefine the very boundaries of our concern. We must perform a critical act of mental triage, an essential separation between what resides within the sacred walls of our own mind and what swirls outside those protective barriers. The core insight is this: nearly all human suffering is rooted in misplacing our energy on things that are fundamentally indifferent to us, or worse, completely beyond our natural jurisdiction. When we look back at the lives of great thinkers like Epictetus, we see not just theories, but practical guides for survival. He taught us that true freedom was never found in external circumstance, a peaceful empire, a profitable venture, or even good health, but only within the unassailable fortress of our own judgment. Nothing can penetrate that inner citadel unless we allow it to. If an event occurs, if a person behaves poorly, if fortune strikes with sudden cruelty, the initial impact might be overwhelming. We feel rage, fear, or deep inadequacy rising up within us. But notice this: it is not the external event itself, the rain falling, the harsh words spoken, the unexpected failure, that diminishes our spirit. It is the story we tell ourselves about that event, the immediate reaction, the judging narrative we construct in moments of distress. That is where the true power lies, and therefore where the responsibility rests. This process demands a daily, deliberate practice of detachment. We must learn to observe events as they are, as mere facts, stripped of our emotional interpretation. The fact is, an exam is scheduled for Friday. This does not automatically mean failure or catastrophe. It means effort and study. A colleague disagreed with you. That is simply disagreement. It does not equate to personal rejection or professional doom. By separating the neutral reality from the dramatic judgment, we instantly reduce the emotional volatility that causes so much suffering. We move away from living in a constant state of reaction and toward inhabiting a space of measured response. This separation is painful at first because our entire cultural conditioning trains us to react dramatically, intensely. We are rewarded for passion, for indignation, for fierce emotion. Stoicism asks us instead to practice what feels profoundly unnatural: the quiet steadiness of indifference in the face of chaos. It requires recognizing that much of the intense self-criticism and anxiety we carry is simply a misplaced effort. We are trying to control other people's feelings about our past selves, or predicting mechanical failures years away. These pursuits are endless wells of emptiness. The dawn of clarity begins with acknowledging this fundamental dichotomy. Your will resides in judgments, intentions, and actions. Everything else, the weather, the markets, others' hearts, is external reality. To place your mental energy anywhere outside that inner circle is to invite fatigue and disillusionment. True peace, therefore, is not a destination arrived at after grand achievements or perfect alliances. It is achieved through the steady act of narrowing one's focus, consistently and calmly, back toward self-mastery. This morning reflection is simply about redrawing our internal map, accepting where the boundaries truly lie, so that we may finally breathe deeply in the solid ground of what remains utterly, gloriously within our own command. We have spent time considering the powerful illusion of control, the ceaseless effort to manage outcomes, moods, and the unpredictable flow of events. We learned that our suffering does not originate from the slings and arrows of fate themselves, but from how we judge them. Yet, if some freedom can be found in recognizing the limits of our power over the outer world, another profound challenge remains. What about other people? The opinions, judgments, and unpredictable behaviors of those around us. For most of humanity, these external sources represent a constant drain on our inner peace. We spend so much energy trying to manage the narratives crafted by others, to prove ourselves right, to avoid disapproval, or simply to earn approval. But in attempting to control what is fundamentally uncontrollable, we often find ourselves trapped in cycles of anxiety and profound frustration. The difficulty here lies in a misunderstanding of what it means to truly interact with another person. We treat human relationships as if they are mechanisms that can be precisely calibrated. If I perform this action, they will respond with this emotion. When their response deviates from our expectation, we experience emotional whiplash, feeling judged, inadequate, and deeply frustrated by the randomness of the other person's spirit. This sense of personal vulnerability is perhaps one of the most persistent sources of human anguish. Philosophy teaches us that when faced with another person's judgment, we must fundamentally shift our focus. We cannot choose what thoughts cross their minds, nor can we mandate how they will behave in a challenging moment. Their actions are rooted in their own history, their internal struggles, and their unique set of judgments entirely separate from the reality of who you are or what you do. Trying to change another person is like trying to redirect the wind with cupped hands. It is an exhausting and futile effort. Our peace cannot be secured by our ability to manage other people's feelings. We have learned that the effort to control the external world is not merely exhausting. It is fundamentally a battle against reality itself. Our minds, naturally inclined toward mastery, see every uncertainty, a failing grade, a canceled trip, an unexpected setback, as a personal affront that demands immediate correction. This frantic energy of resistance is where our deepest anxieties are born. But what if we approached life not as an arena to be dominated, but as a profound sequence of inevitable occurrences? Seneca reminds us that much of the suffering we endure does not come from the loss itself, but from our attachment to the idea that such things should never happen. Our value, our sense of security, becomes mistakenly tied up in the permanence of objects and circumstances. This is the great illusion of possession. We treat stable things as if they were invincible, forgetting that time and change are the only true constants. To truly live with calm agency, we must engage in a practice Seneca called premeditation, or premeditatio malorum. It sounds morbid, perhaps even excessive, but its purpose is profoundly liberating. It is not about dwelling on despair. Rather, it is about neutralizing shock through imagination. By calmly considering the potential loss, the job gone, the health decline, the beloved possession damaged, we rob those future events of their terrifying mystery and their unexpected power. We are essentially building mental immunities to shock. Consider this. When a storm hits unprepared shores, it is overwhelmingly violent. But if one lives with an awareness of the sea's cyclical fury, acknowledging that rough tides belong to its nature, the arrival of the tempest becomes merely predictable. The emotional force behind unexpected loss often stems from surprise itself. We are surprised by the change, and that surprise makes us feel powerless. Seneca teaches that by mentally rehearsing these potential falls, we transform fear into a rational preparedness. When the inevitable happens, when fortune withdraws its gifts, or when circumstances shift against our will, we do not experience emotional devastation. Instead, we recognize it as an expected fluctuation of life's rhythm. This realization immediately shrinks the perceived magnitude of the loss. The deepest lesson here is that attachment itself is a vulnerability. Our fierce grip on possessions, relationships, and achievements makes us slaves to their whims. If our sense of self-worth resides in things that are inherently outside our control, the favor of another person, the stability of markets, the condition of an object, then we are perpetually subjected to anxiety. The challenge is profound: to decouple who we fundamentally are from what we own or achieve. We must redefine enough. Enough means not just physical sustenance, but mental sufficiency. It means building a character that thrives regardless of external conditions. This internal citadel remains untouched by the changing fortunes of the material world. When we accept impermanence, when we recognize that everything is loaned to us, and nothing truly belongs solely to our eternal possession, the grip of fear loosens. Loss ceases to be a catastrophe and becomes simply an event in the ongoing narrative of existence. It is merely matter returning to chaos, moving on from your sphere. This acceptance is not passive resignation. Do not confuse Stoic calm with apathy or surrender. On the contrary, genuine acceptance, fueled by this foresight, gives us incredible freedom and energy. It shifts our emotional resources away from resisting the unchangeable and redirects them toward mastery of judgment in the present moment. We stop wasting precious mental energy fighting tides that have already receded. Instead, we ask a more potent question: what is the most honorable, rational response to this particular challenge? Given my true self, Seneca guides us to understand that resilience is not built by accumulating comforts, but by repeatedly demonstrating our capacity to function and find meaning even after setbacks. The ability to laugh at one's own temporary misfortune, to accept a setback with a detached dignity, is the highest form of inner freedom. By practicing letting go, we free ourselves to live more boldly, for fear is no longer the master of our actions, but mere counsel from past experience. We have spent these chapters wrestling with the immense burden of what lies outside us. We looked at the uncontrolled passions of others, the unpredictability of fortune, and the unsettling reality of loss itself. By acknowledging these forces, the tide, the whim of a stranger, the passage of time, we began to feel a certain exhaustion. It is natural to try and force control onto things that are inherently fluid. We instinctively want neat boundaries, clear rules for how the world should behave, so that we can feel safe from discomfort. But reality, as always, refuses such simple geometric patterns. The universe does not operate in clean circles. It operates through complex, messy human interactions and in different natural forces. Today, we must draw a line, a philosophical demarcation that changes everything, the distinction between what is truly ours to manage and what belongs entirely to the flow of existence. This is the Stoic dichotomy of control. It is not merely a concept, it is a necessary mental act of triage for the soul. Consider your mind itself as a vast arena. In one quadrant are things that scream for our attention, other people's decisions, global markets, past mistakes we cannot retrieve, or even simply how others look at us. These belong to the external world, the realm of indifference. In Stoic terms, they do not dictate your worth, they merely exist. And then, in a much smaller, yet infinitely more valuable quadrant, is what belongs entirely within you, your judgment, your immediate impulse, the conscious choice to respond before reacting. This internal space is the fortress we must defend at all costs. It is the last point of free will we possess. Seneca spoke often about this separation, urging us not to invest our energy into modifying the actions of others because their minds are not ours to sculpt. Our focus must instead be on the molding of ourselves. The sheer magnitude of this realization can feel disempowering at first. When faced with a monumental problem, say, an economic downturn or deep personal conflict, the urge is to expand our sphere of influence until it encompasses everything threatening us. But the discipline required is counterintuitive. Sometimes the greatest power comes from accepting limits. Drawing this boundary is not about giving up. It is about precision. It is like a master carpenter who understands that all the tools he possesses, saws, chisels, planes, are his own property, and which parts of the house are within his immediate reach. He does not waste precious minutes trying to force the cornerstone into place if it is already set by others. Think about the anxious spiral triggered by a single unforeseen event. Perhaps you miss a deadline because an unexpected bureaucratic delay happened miles away. Your initial reaction is likely anger directed outward at the system, at the people who caused the delay, or even at yourself for not being fast enough to predict it all. This mental energy, wasted on blame and resentment, burns us out. The Stoic mind redirects this flow. It says, "The delay occurred outside my control. I cannot change the passing bureaucracy, but what can I control? I can control my next action. I can choose to send an email asking for clarification rather than dwelling on the perceived injustice. I can choose patience over panic. The focus narrows instantly, drawing energy away from the unchangeable event and redirecting it into the actionable response. This process allows us to build what Epictetus called our inner citadel. When everything outside, our wealth, our relationships, our reputation, is subject to change, decay, or human frailty, the only thing that remains stable is our capacity for reasoned judgment. Our judgments are the filters through which we interpret chaos. If we can control those filters, we can maintain a state of profound internal calm, even when the world outside us descends into storm. The lesson here is a permanent shift in locus of control. We must stop viewing life as a series of external demands that we must satisfy to feel worthy or safe. Instead, we learn to see it as a self-contained experiment where our primary subject is our own character. The highest good, the genuine peace, is found not in favorable outcomes, but in consistently choosing excellent judgment. Acceptance, therefore, does not mean passive resignation to suffering. It is an active, deliberate, strategic withdrawal of mental effort from battlegrounds we cannot win. It is recognizing that fighting a current requires endless strength, whereas simply floating with the flow, while observing and adjusting only what is nearest to you, preserves your vital energy for genuine self-improvement. When life inevitably throws something unmanageable at you, a setback, a profound misunderstanding, a change in direction you desperately resist, you must be able to mentally trace that line. Identify the border between what happened and how I choose to respond. Dedicate your full force of attention only to the latter side of the boundary. That is where true agency resides. By doing this rigorous mental work every day, we transform powerlessness into profound freedom. We have spent time recognizing the immense scope of our anxieties. We have learned that much of what we worry about, the whims of fortune, the opinions of others, the sheer randomness of life's events, falls outside the reach of our will. This realization is often uncomfortable because human nature craves certainty and total control. It feels less like a philosophical truth and more like an abandonment of power itself. The profound lesson, however, is that true power never resided in changing the world around us. That would be a Sisyphean task, exhausting and inevitably failing. Our power, our sanctuary, resides entirely within the boundary of our own judgment. This is the core teaching of Stoicism. Everything external is indifferent, only your response matters. Think of it this way: an event itself is merely a neutral fact. A harsh word spoken to you in anger, the traffic suddenly gridlocking at rush hour, the sudden crushing realization that a relationship has ended. These are simply occurrences in the flow of time. They carry no inherent moral weight, and they hold no intrinsic power over your inner state. What imbues them with pain or distress is not the event itself, but the story you tell yourself about it. It is the judgment, and judgments are always voluntary. For too long, we have accepted anxiety as an inevitable feature of the human condition. We treat worry not as a choice, but as a fundamental emotional response to uncertainty. But what if that assumption itself is faulty? What if anxiety is less a natural state and more a habit of poorly managed attention? The Stoics understood this profoundly. They did not simply tell us to be calm. Instead, they taught us how to change the very mechanism by which we relate to future uncertainty. True preparation, therefore, is not a vague feeling. It is an intellectual act of reframing. We have spent these chapters identifying what lies within our control, our judgments, our will, and our immediate responses, and separating that inner sphere from the vast, messy domain of external events. Now we must use this separation to actively combat the tendency toward chronic worry. Worry is essentially an imagined failure. It is spending mental energy on a negative outcome that may never arrive, or if it does, may not be correctable. When faced with uncertainty, a looming deadline, an uncertain relationship, global instability, our natural inclination is to mentally simulate catastrophe. We rewind the clock and relive moments of potential failure in our minds. This mental looping drains us completely, trapping us in a cycle that feels proactive, but is, in reality, just perpetual rumination. The ancient philosophers saw this self-inflicted torment and offered a transformative shift to move from mere worrying to genuine preparation. This distinction is critical because worry suggests that the mere act of thinking about failure will somehow stop it. Preparation, by contrast, involves systematic mental mapping. It requires us to acknowledge the potential difficulty. Yes, but instead of dwelling in fear, we ask a different question. What specific action can I take right now to mitigate the risk? This transforms an amorphous cloud of dread into a manageable series of concrete steps. The anxious mind loves generalities. It thrives on vague fears, the fear of failure, the fear of judgment, the fear of the unknown. But genuine preparation demands specificity. It forces us to bring our emotional energy down from the foggy altitudes of what if and plant it firmly back into the practical soil of what then. Consider a massive, unavoidable challenge approaching. The worried person spends their time arguing with the difficulty. They obsess over how unfair it is, or how overwhelming the sheer scale is. They are trapped in emotional argument. The prepared mind, however, accepts the magnitude of the problem as given fact and then asks, what resources do I already possess? What small action can I complete today that makes the next step marginally easier? This process of preparation does not guarantee success. It merely maximizes internal readiness. It shifts our focus from external outcomes, which remain stubbornly outside our power, to internal systems, our routines, our knowledge base, and our emotional resilience. Imagine a sailor facing rough seas. The worried person stares at the massive waves and feels helpless, paralyzed by the potential force of nature. They lose all ability to think clearly because their mind is overwhelmed by fear. The prepared sailor, having acknowledged the danger, focuses instead on the immediate task, tightening the ropes, adjusting the trim, coordinating with the crew for the next 10 minutes. He accepts that the storm will remain, but he concentrates his power on the controllable mechanics of survival. This is the philosophical engineering at work. We are not trying to wish away difficulties. we are building mental infrastructure strong enough to withstand them. We learn to observe our anxious thoughts, those swirling tides of what if with the detachment that Epictetus taught us to reserve for observing a passing cloud. We see the thought, identify it as a mere judgment, and refuse to grant it emotional gravity. The practice here is repetition. Every time anxiety whispers about an uncontrollable future disaster, we must counter it with two statements. One, acknowledging reality. This difficulty may arise. And one, asserting agency. But my immediate response will be X. This short circuit breaks the cycle of fear into a loop of actionable calm. Preparation also requires us to re-examine our assumptions about suffering. We often assume that anxiety is simply inevitable, that some level of worry is just part of being alive. But we are taught that anxiety, at its core, is resistance to reality. It is the feeling of wishing things were different than they must be. The moment we accept the immutable truth of the present, the fact that right now this struggle exists, we divest ourselves of unnecessary emotional fuel. We move beyond simply accepting what has already happened and toward proactively mastering how we will react when the next challenge presents itself. This is not Stoic fatalism. It is powerful realism. It is recognizing that while life may throw storms at us, our capacity for reasoned response remains an internal fortress, always available to be maintained and strengthened through focused practice. We stop viewing ourselves as victims of circumstance and start seeing ourselves as diligent architects of our own inner calm. The journey from worry to preparation is a radical act of psychological power transfer, giving up the fruitless battle against fate in exchange for absolute mastery over the self at every single point in time. This disciplined focus, this willingness to prepare mentally for what we cannot prevent, is perhaps the highest expression of freedom available to us. We have spent our journey learning to draw the sacred line of control. We understand that many things, the currents of history, the stubborn habits of others, even the inevitable turning of luck, remain outside the circumference of our influence. This understanding is not a place of passive resignation. It is the foundation for courageous action. It is the art of knowing where to invest your formidable energy. This next stage requires us to learn what the Stoics called wise non-intervention. It is the quiet, potent wisdom of realizing when struggle itself is the greatest impediment to peace. Sometimes, the greatest virtuous act is simply to let things be, to observe the natural unfolding without the need to micromanage, correct, or forcibly change an external reality that seems deeply flawed. The human spirit has a profound, almost desperate craving for efficacy. We are wired to fix what is broken, to optimize what lags, and to rescue what slips away. When faced with someone who repeatedly disappoints us, when we see a system in place that causes unnecessary suffering, or when we confront a deep-seated personal flaw within ourselves. Our instinct is always intervention. We gather the weapons of argument, the urgency of advice, and the emotional force of conviction. But true wisdom recognizes that brute force of will often meets with the rigidity of unyielding reality. To intervene where non-intervention is required creates a secondary suffering, the anguish of having exerted effort for zero observable change. This exertion does not lead to resolution. It merely leads to fatigue, disappointment, and a profound sense of being ineffective. The art of wise non-intervention demands a monumental shift in perspective, moving from the stance of the rescuer or the architect to that of the witness. We become observers of human nature, of circumstance, and of our own impulses. Our task is not to build the perfect world around us, but to cultivate an unshakable inner peace regardless of the imperfect reality we inhabit. Consider relationships in particular. We often mistake deep care for the absolute authority to change another person's core character or choices. We tirelessly offer guidance, anticipating that with enough truth and gentle pressure, the other person will finally see the light or alter their destructive patterns. Yet, an individual's transformation belongs solely within the sovereign domain of their own mind. It is a journey they must undertake alone, one which we can only support with presence, never with mandate. The power inherent in non-intervention lies in accepting boundaries that may feel frustratingly absolute and undeserved. We learn to accept these boundaries without developing bitterness or carrying the emotional weight of what could have been. This requires a radical form of intellectual surrender, not physical defeat. This lesson applies with equal force to circumstances beyond our immediate reach. There are times when a social injustice is so vast that our individual protest feels like whistling into a hurricane, or when deeply ingrained community problems seem too complex to resolve through single-minded effort. In these moments of overwhelming scope, the interventionist impulse suggests we must fight harder, louder, and longer until we achieve the desired shift. But wise non-intervention guides us toward the profound truth. Some struggles are simply outside the sphere of influence defined by our own rational action. We must ask ourselves a disciplined question every time the urge to act forcefully arises. Is my action today primarily intended for something that resides within my power? Or is it an attempt to impose order upon chaos, hoping to bend another person's will or alter fate's timeline? The Stoic response is a graceful withdrawal of effort. It is not disengagement, rather, it is precise energy management. We commit fully to our own virtue, speaking the truth when necessary, practicing justice in our dealings, and maintaining self-control within our sphere. And crucially, we relinquish the need for external validation or perfect visible outcomes. Our internal accounting of a life well lived cannot rely on the success of changing others. It must rely solely on the integrity of one's own character. This cultivated distance from immediate outcome is not cold detachment. It is deep clarity. It is recognizing that the only true good, and therefore the only thing truly worthy of our persistent mental effort, is the quality of our own judgment at this very moment. We shift our focus entirely inward, building an internal sanctuary where no external event can penetrate or diminish our sense of peace. By ceasing the exhausting fight against what cannot be changed, we reclaim that boundless energy, allowing ourselves to live with a measured calmness, resilient and fully self-possessed, regardless of the tumult swirling just beyond our personal boundaries. We have traveled a long distance in the study of self-mastery. We learned that much of our distress comes not from the world around us, but from the story we tell ourselves about it. We discovered the profound boundary between what is truly within our reach and what remains stubbornly outside. This journey has taught us that freedom is not granted by fortune or guaranteed by circumstance. It is a deliberate discipline of attention. If earlier chapters taught us where to draw that line, this chapter teaches us how to stand calmly on the solid ground of our own choices when the currents of fate pull at us. We are talking about patience, but do not mistake Stoic patience for passive resignation. It is far more active than that. It is an engagement with reality at its steady, measured pace. The temptation in life, the constant siren song, is to rush things, to demand immediate resolution. When a student struggles with a difficult concept, he wants instant understanding. When the garden needs seeds planted, we want the bloom by morning. We live in a culture of immediacy, where delay is perceived as failure, and slowness feels like weakness. Yet, wisdom shows us that profound truths are rarely fast. True mastery, whether it be mastering a challenging skill, cultivating deep virtue, or allowing a complex relationship to heal, requires the slow, inevitable turn of the season. It requires the long view. It demands that we learn to trust the unfolding process. Consider the powerful metaphor of the river. A river does not rush through a mountain pass hoping for speed. It follows the path of least resistance and greatest continuity. Its power lies precisely in its unwavering persistence, year after predictable year, chipping away at stone with relentless constancy. The river understands that force is useless, only sustained direction matters. This principle applies to our inner lives. When we seek change, a change in habit, a resolution of conflict, the growth of character, we must adopt the mind of the river. We cannot yank massive emotional blocks from place. They must erode over time, droplet by patient droplet. The desperate struggle against reality only creates turbulence and exhausts us. The practice here is radical acceptance of duration. It means learning to be fully present with the not yet. It is inhabiting the space between the action we take and the desired outcome, a vast expanse, often filled with uncertainty, frustration, and the whisper of impatience's edge. Many people confuse waiting with doing nothing. We must correct this fundamental misunderstanding. Waiting, in a virtuous sense, is an intensely active form of mental labor. It is the work of maintaining equilibrium when everything around you feels chaotic. It means cultivating a rich inner life while external circumstances remain dormant or resistant. Think back to the times you felt powerless, when the global news kept flashing tragedy, when personal relationships stalled, when efforts seemed invisible. The initial reaction is often despair, a yearning to force an end point immediately. But the disciplined mind steps back and observes the system. It asks, what is my virtuous action right now? What single, steady habit of character can I reinforce while I wait for conditions, natural or personal, to ripen? This transforms passivity into vigilance. The philosopher Epictetus taught us that we should only prepare ourselves for what is coming, not desperately try to change what has already begun. Patience, therefore, becomes a focused energy directed at oneself. It is the commitment to maintaining your character's integrity, regardless of external confirmation or swift results. To master patience is to realize that the greatest power we possess is our ability to endure without breaking form. We learn to love the process itself, the struggle toward excellence, the gradual unfolding of understanding, not just the clean, bright moment of achievement. This perspective shifts the goalposts entirely. The success is no longer marked by a dramatic victory or an immediate resolution. It is measured by the consistency of our own reasoned, calm effort over time. It is building character brick by careful brick, day after patient day. Embracing the long view requires us to discard the emotional demand for instant gratification. We must practice the radical humility of recognizing that life, like growth, moves according to its internal timetable, not ours. Sometimes the seeds need deep shade before they can pierce the light. Sometimes the deepest personal understanding only comes after the quiet solitude of prolonged difficulty. This is not merely enduring time. It is utilizing time wisely. It is transforming mere waiting into a fertile field for contemplation and self-improvement. We are moving from simply controlling our judgments to managing our expectations regarding time itself. We must develop an almost scientific appreciation for process, recognizing that the accumulation of small, virtuous actions creates inertia far stronger than any sudden burst of unsustainable passion. That steady momentum is what defines a truly temperate and powerful life. To be patient is to be disciplined in the slow accumulating weight of one's own goodwill. It is the quiet assurance that while we cannot dictate the ending scene, we can absolutely control how virtuous, focused, and resilient we remain. Until the curtain rises, we have journeyed through the landscapes of control, examining everything from our possessions to the opinions of others. We have learned that much of what causes us distress lies outside the reach of our hands. Our minds, however, remain the one sovereign territory we possess. This brings us to the most intimate arena of philosophy, the internal dialogue. The external world will always buffet us with unexpected events, unsolicited criticisms, and moments that demand an immediate reaction. In these critical junctures, it is easy for the reactive mind to take the wheel. We argue with reality. We justify our impulses, building elaborate mental narratives that defend the wrongness of the event or the injustice of the person. This instant burst of defensiveness is where our power leaks away. The discipline required here is profound. We must cultivate a space between the stimulus and our response. It is a microscopic pause, a breath drawn when panic rises, or a moment of silence before voicing anger. In that gap lies the freedom. It is in that fraction of time that we can intervene with reason. Think of your mind as a highly trafficked port. Without self-correction, the mental cargo will arrive haphazardly. Fear of failure mixed with resentment for circumstance, packaged and rushed out into the world. The practice of Stoicism teaches us to become conscientious harbor masters. Before allowing any thought, any judgment to leave that internal dock, we must pause and question its origin and its truth. This is not merely remembering a theory. It is implementing a mental guardrail. When an upsetting event occurs, the initial urge might be to blame the world, or worse, to blame oneself for failing to prevent it. Instead, the self-corrector asks a simple, powerful question. Is this judgment based on what actually happened, or is it colored by my fear of what might happen? The second vital step in this internal dialogue is accountability, specifically defining who owns the thought. When we find ourselves spiraling into an unproductive critique of others, the first self-correcting reflex must be to gently redirect that energy inward. The complaint about a neighbor's careless noise, for example, does not improve the situation. It only drains your inner peace. You observe the event, you note your emotional investment in changing it, and then you redirect that attention back to your own sphere of action. What can I control right now? My response, my exit strategy, my decision to simply turn my focus elsewhere. The core practice here is recognizing that every negative thought, every accusation, every rumination on past mistakes or future failures is merely a hypothesis, not a fact. It is a product of an emotional processor running too hot. Our job is to become the cool, rational observer that steps in and says, "Wait, let us examine this hypothesis. Where is the objective evidence for this judgment?" This careful internal arbitration allows us to unhook our sense of worth from external validation. If your inner critic attacks you, if you judge yourself harshly for a mistake made yesterday, you must treat that internal voice with the same reasoned distance as you would an external adversary. You acknowledge the thought, but you do not grant it jurisdiction over your spirit. You might whisper to yourself, "That is simply my fear speaking. It has no authority here." The consequence of mastering this dialogue is a deep and sustainable form of agency. We stop being victims of our own mental narratives. The events still happen, the unexpected rejection, necessary disappointment, the loss of time, but they no longer possess the keys to our emotional state. They become mere neutral inputs, like rain hitting a window pane. You observe them. You do not internalize them as indictments against your spirit. This self-correction is ultimately an act of radical grace, grace given to yourself. It means accepting that you will stumble. You will forget the lesson. You will react poorly when tired or stressed. The wisdom lies in noticing the lapse, acknowledging it without shame, and then gently, deliberately, redirecting your focus back to the steady ground of virtue and reason. This internal dialogue is not a destination. It is the ongoing process of mindful refinement. It is where philosophy ceases to be merely an intellectual study and becomes the very breathing rhythm of a tranquil life. We have traveled a long distance on the road toward tranquility. We began by questioning the deep human habit of attempting to control every external variable, the whim of fortune, the intentions of others, or the outcome of our deepest desires. It is exhausting, this relentless effort to tame the uncontrollable world. But through repeated moments of reflection, we have learned a profound truth, that true freedom does not arrive from changing the world around us. It arrives entirely from mastering the inner landscape of the self. Remember the teachings of Seneca, who taught us to anticipate loss so that no shock could ever truly paralyze us. Recall Epictetus' steady voice, reminding us that others' minds and actions are outside our jurisdiction. And consider the power found within the boundaries we established for ourselves. The clear separation between what is up to us and what remains fundamentally beyond our reach. This understanding is not a surrender. It is not resignation masquerading as calm acceptance. Rather, it is a highly disciplined strategy of focus. It means recognizing where your finite mental energy must be strategically applied if you wish to achieve genuine peace. We are learning that the battleground for our inner peace is never outside. It is always right here, within the space between the event and our response. The core lesson has been this profound distinction. An external event, a storm gathering overhead, a criticism leveled in public, is merely a neutral fact. It possesses no inherent moral weight and cannot cause suffering by itself. Suffering only begins when we layer judgment upon that fact, when we tell ourselves that the event is intolerable or unjust or devastatingly unfair. It is our interpretation, our deeply held assumption of what things ought to be, which plants the seed of anxiety. The journey has taught us to become masters of this internal dialogue, to pause in that critical space between stimulus and reaction, and simply ask, is my anguish focused on something I can genuinely influence? If the answer points toward the external world, the market, another person's mood, a historical mistake, then we must gently redirect our attention back to ourselves. Living within these self-imposed boundaries gives us what the philosophers call the inner citadel. It is not a physical fortress. It is a resilient, unshakable core of reasoned judgment that can withstand any emotional assault from the outside world. When life throws its inevitable torrent of disappointments and ambiguities at us, we do not crumble. We feel the impact, yes, but our root remains firm because we know where our power resides, in the integrity of our own judgment. The tranquility we seek is therefore less about achieving perfect outcomes, which fate reserves the right to withhold, and more about maintaining unblemished internal character regardless of those outcomes. It is the calm certainty that even if everything falls apart, the job, the relationship, the ideal plan, we possess something irreplaceable, our ability to choose how we view it. Consider this quiet revolution in perspective. We move from a posture of anxious struggle against reality toward one of mindful alignment with reality. We stop fighting things as they are and start aligning ourselves to meet them wisely. This means cultivating the art of non-intervention, the quiet wisdom of knowing when the most virtuous action is simply to observe, to let the natural course unfold without us forcing an outcome that resists change. This acceptance we speak of is not a shrug of despair. It is a profound intellectual engagement with reality's given facts. It requires continuous vigilance. Like tending a vital internal garden, we must constantly pull out the weeds of fear and expectation. We practice self-correction when our mind drifts into the territory of what if, allowing us to anchor ourselves firmly back onto the reliable ground of what is. The disciplined life, then, becomes one defined by its boundaries. The boundary with others says, you are responsible for your own character, and only yours. The boundary with fortune says, I will meet whatever happens with reason. And the boundary with the self whispers that true agency lies in this very moment, right now, in the conscious choice of thought. The goal is not merely to feel calm. That feeling is fleeting and dependent on external conditions. The goal is to be steady, to be reliably principled, irrespective of circumstance, to build a life so anchored in internal discipline that the tides of fortune may crash against us, but never manage to shake our fundamental peace. This sustained state of inner freedom is the truest form of human accomplishment. To realize that your deepest wealth was never found in what you controlled externally,